everyone. A very good evening to you. It's a rainy day in New Delhi. Great to see you join us today in this very exciting session. My name is Himanshu and I represent Speakin. A very special guest for today is Ms. Urvashi Prasad, who is a public policy specialist at Niti Aayog. Before we move on to the session, just a quick introduction so that I can justify my presence here. Ms. Urvashi Prasad has extensive experience in health, nutrition, sanitation, gender, and public policy. Over the last 4 years, Urvashi has been working as a public policy specialist in the office of the Vice Chairman at Niti Aayog. He is currently a member of the core team, which is supporting the government of India's Empowered Group 1 for managing the COVID-19 pandemic in the country. And she's also a member of the task force or overseeing the implementation of the sustainable development goals in India and co-authored India's first voluntary national review, which was presented at United Nations High Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development in 2017. Wow. She's a member of the World Economic Forum's expert network and an alumnus of the World Economic Forum's Shaper community. Over she completed her bachelor from the University of Birmingham in UK, followed by an MPhil from the University of Cambridge and an MSc from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. I can go on and on about Ms. Prasad, but in interest of time, moving on to the session, thank you so much, Ms. Prasad, for joining us today. It's fantastic to have you with us.
Thank you so much.
The pleasure is entirely ours. Uh, Moving on to the session, we have a lot of interesting questions here lined up, and a lot of people really want to understand what the situation is going to look like. So I'll begin with a very quick introduction from you to get your opening thoughts. That we all have been seeing what is in the news, and what is the situation out there. We've been listening from different media houses. Someone says something, someone else says something else. So, as a public policy specialist who works very closely within the healthcare domain with the government, how would you describe the current situation in India? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I mean, it's obviously a very broad canvas. So I'll try to sum up very briefly, and then of course, we'll take the questions so we can go into different aspects in greater depth. But at an overall level, as you would be seeing in the news and various reports put out by the government as well. So the COVID cases, of course, in the country have been going up, and that is something that we've seen, and we've seen the numbers go up in the last few weeks, especially. But it's important to note that a lot of that is also because of increased testing. I think that is a very fundamental principle that your numbers are a direct function of the tests you do. If you don't do enough testing, you can have very low numbers, you can look very good on the face of it, but you might not be able to control the actual epidemic in the country. So yes, the numbers are going up, but we must realize that a lot of states have massively ramped up testing. And that is really based on the recommendations of all the experts, everybody who works in the public health space and the policy space, that you cannot have an approach where you don't test and your numbers are low and it's a comfortable situation. So if we look at Uttar Pradesh, for instance, it's a large state, it's our most populous state. Just recently, they have started doing more than 1 lakh tests per day. So that's a big number that they've come to, starting from a very, very low number, a few months back. Now, of course, that number needs to go up even further, because Uttar Pradesh, as I say, it's not a state, it's a country. Its population is comparable to Brazil. So, obviously there's a lot more to be done. But it's very encouraging that testing is now being taken up by many states. So that I see as a positive. On the, I think the most important metric really for us now in this phase of the pandemic is the fatalities. The COVID related deaths that we have, that is the number that we have to keep very low. What is fortunate is that what is called the case fatality rate. So, out of the number of confirmed cases, how many people are unfortunately losing their lives, that number has been steadily coming down. So we were at around 3.3% or so somewhere in the middle of June. And now we are down to around 2.2%. So, we need to keep bringing this number down. Our ultimate goal is really that this number should be no more than 1%. We should really not have any more fatalities than that, and that should be our sort of the maximum that we sort of accept for ourselves as a standard. Of course, as many lives as we can save, that is still very much the goal. And I think that is something that the Prime Minister has made clear right from the beginning, that the goal is to save as many lives as possible. So I think that's really what is in a nutshell on the COVID front. On the economy front, just very quickly, as you know, we've been going through the unlocking phase. In fact, pretty much after the very first phase of lockdown, we progressively started opening certain, parts of the economy, because of course, India is a very informal economy. We have a very large, vulnerable, poor population. So I think it was very obvious to everybody that we cannot be in lockdown, for a prolonged period of time. But it was a public health imperative at that point. We didn't really have a choice. We were dealing with a very unknown entity. This is important. This is not a virus the world has seen before. We are all seeing it for the first time. So it was a very unknown entity for us. So, a lot of the decisions we had to take were not based on a lot of information that we had available to us in the beginning. But now progressively, we are learning more and more about the disease. We are learning how to manage it better. So we are also trying to open up different parts of the economy. In a lot of states, many activities have picked up, be it construction, be it manufacturing. But, we have to always keep that fine balance with the public health imperative. And it's a very difficult balance, frankly, to achieve. And there is really no perfect way of doing it. But we're trying our best to sort of keep up that balance so that the impact, the long-term impact on the economy is as minimal as possible, and different sectors can start picking up. But as I said, we always keep our eye on the numbers on the health side, because you're not going to have economic progress if your health situation is looking very bad. And if anything, that's one thing the pandemic has taught us, that health is not just a social sector, it's as much an economic sector. And if you need good health of the economy, in every sense of the word, you need good health of the population as well. So I think that is really, I would say, just a very quick overview, and then we can sort of get into different aspects that we're getting interest from people.
No, thank you so much for these opening thoughts. I mean, it was a fantastic introduction, and as you very rightly mentioned, that this is a problem which not just India but the entire world has never seen before. In spite of that, some good news coming from you is a very welcome thought, and we really hope that the situation gets better very soon once again. Thank you so much for that. And moving on to my next question for you, and this was actually a question which was raised by one of the students who wanted to know about this particular thing. The student asked that you're also a member of the core team who's supporting the work of the government's Empowered One response group, which is one of the several groups managing the COVID-19 pandemic. So would you like to throw some light on how the Empowered One group as well as the other groups, what are they working on, and how are they actually helping the people out there?
Yeah, so every empowered group is obviously looking at a slightly different aspect of managing this epidemic in the country. But the Empowered Group 1 was really tasked originally, and we continue to work on that, with developing a sort of emergency management plan for the country, forecasting the infrastructure requirements for different states. How many beds are needed, how many isolation beds are needed, how many ICU beds are needed, how many ventilators do we need, how much oxygen supply do we need. So really getting into those details and doing a forecast for all the states based on how we see the numbers playing out. Because as I said, states in India, many of them are like countries by themselves. So, we have to really get down to the details of what's happening at the district level in different cities. Recently there was a very high level of engagement with Delhi and the surrounding region, the cities in the surrounding region. There was a heavy engagement from the center, and of course working closely with the state government because the situation in Delhi was getting a little bit out of hand. So we really go down to forecasts at the city district level, and then we try to develop this plan that, what will be the sort of infrastructure required, what will be the human resources required, how many doctors do we need, how many specialists do we need, how many nurses do we need. So that's the kind of plan that we, prepared right at the outset, and of course we keep updating it. on a regular basis. We also keep having detailed discussions with individual states as and when they need support, to see, how the situation can be best managed for them. Because as I said, there's no one size fits all, solution ever in India, and definitely not with this pandemic, because everyone's, having a slightly different experience of how it's playing out in their state or in their city. So we take up, detailed deep dives with different states, with even cities or districts which are facing a high caseload, to see what specific strategies can we help them with. So I think that's another big piece of it. The other is, of course, linking up people in the government and whatever work is happening in the government with those outside, the private sector, the civil society. So in fact, there is also an Empowered Group 6, which is chaired by the CEO of NITI Aayog, Mr. Amitabh Kant. And that is really the mandate of that group, is to really bring together private players. So, we started with almost no capacity to, manufacture these sort of ventilators and the masks and 95 masks that you need. So there was almost the PPE kits that you need. There was very little capacity when we started. And now if you see, we are in a position where we can actually export a lot of this material, so we have adequate supplies through domestic manufacturing. So a lot of that has come through partnership with the private sector. And of course, management of community level, initiatives. So stigma, for instance, we know that stigma has become a big problem in COVID. People associate a lot of stigma with health conditions like HIV, with mental health, with cancer, TB. We are seeing something very similar, unfortunately, with COVID. So in that domain, we've had a lot of NGOs and civil society organizations play a big role. So I think, it's always been clear to the government from the start that no pandemic, no epidemic of this scale can be managed just by the government. You have to work with the private sector, you have to work with civil society, you have to work with volunteers. We've had large numbers of volunteer doctors coming forward, volunteers on the data side, the technology side, coming forward. In fact, Arogya Setu, which all of you would know, that itself has been a huge initiative where we've seen people coming together, volunteering their skills, and a massive collaboration. So I think a lot of the work of these empowered groups is obviously to focus on different aspects of the management of the epidemic itself, whether it's planning, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's logistics, whether it's human resources, whether it's communication, as I said, addressing the stigma part, encouraging people to continue to follow, hand hygiene and physical distancing norms. But then a lot of their work is also to connect with whatever help we can get from the outside, whether it's the private sector, whether it's the NGOs, whether it's individuals who want to volunteer, because we really need all hands on deck for something like this. It's very difficult for any government, just any government in the world, to be tackling, and given our population size and our population density, because you have to remember that this, the virus, it has a much higher propensity for spreading in densely populated areas. And India, as we know, is one of the most densely populated countries in the world. So we are facing a lot of challenges, but the effort is to try and get as many stakeholders together as we can, to try and address this. And as I said, ultimately save as many lives as possible.
That's a fantastic answer, and I'm actually glad that there are these groups and there are these different organizations which are actually coming together to help the people during these difficult times. This question was from Madhu, who's pursuing her masters from the Delhi University. I really hope Madhu got her answer. It was a fantastic question from her. Thank you so much for answering this. I would like to move on to my next question, and so I mean it's very clear at this moment that it's a futile exercise to compare countries with each other regarding with respect to how they are dealing with crisis, because every country has their own set of problems at present. However, if we would just ignore that fact for a moment for the sake of the discussion, so how would you comment that what has India's response been with respect to the outbreak of COVID-19 in general?
Yeah, so yes, I think as I said at the beginning that, because this is something so unusual, this is not something that any of us have seen in our lifetimes. There can be a lot of sort of opinion that we can express in hindsight, that, was the decision to lock down correct or not? And this is something that I get asked all the time. I've written about this as well, that, was the decision to lock down correct? Was the timing of the lockdown correct? Did we need a nationwide lockdown, or, would local sort of lockdowns have sufficed? And these are all great questions. I mean, I don't think there is anything wrong in asking these questions. But the issue is, if you see from the lens of, the policy makers, or even if you see from the lens of the sort of the highest political leadership in the country, you are faced with this unknown virus, this unknown entity. And you have the task of, saving lives, so what do you really do at that point? And if you will see that lockdown is actually a strategy that many countries in the world eventually did have to use. In fact, if we, see even by just mid-April or so, we had large parts of the world under lockdown. Most of Europe was under lockdown. A lot of America started coming under lockdown. Of course, India was under a nationwide lockdown by then. But by the time these countries imposed a lockdown, they had already incurred a very heavy sort of burden of cases and deaths. So if I take the example of United Kingdom, for instance, United Kingdom already was having a very high death rate before they decided to lock down. So the choice for India was that, we could have waited another month. We could have let it not be such a, nationwide lockdown, but just in a few areas. We could have gone down that path, but the risk is that we might have lost many more additional lives. And I think that would have been a very big price to pay. And I don't think, any sort of sensible and political leadership which is responsible would want to say that I'm okay with lives being lost. Nobody would want to say something like that. So I think that's where that initial decision was driven. But then, as I said, that after that, we have always tried to progressively open up whatever we can. Because of course we realized that there were huge hardships. I mean, the hardships faced by our migrant workers, for instance, I think there's no denying that. And I don't think anybody would even try to deny that a lot of people faced a lot of hardships during this lockdown period. And that's unfortunately a price we paid in a country which is still very poor, which has a still large informal economy. So I think that we are very cognizant of. And I think that is not something that we can ignore at all. But as I said, it was a very difficult choice, and it was a very difficult trade-off to make. If you look at Sweden, Sweden chose not to have a lockdown. And if you compare Sweden to its neighboring countries, if you can compare Sweden to Norway, Finland, Denmark, Sweden has actually done much worse, not just on COVID, but also on the economy. And this is a very interesting point, because the reason why Sweden said that we don't want a nationwide lockdown is so that the economy can do better. But in the end, they have ended up not only losing more lives to COVID, but their economy is also suffering just as much. It's not like that they are doing much better than Finland or Denmark or anybody in their surrounding regions. So I think, in hindsight, of course, there's a lot of these discussions we can have. But at that point in time, given the situation, given that our health system was not prepared, to deal with something like this. You have to remember that India, we have a lot of variations across our country in terms of how the health system is prepared. We have a shortage of doctors. We have a shortage of other health personnel. As I said, we were not even manufacturing really PPE kits in India at any sort of scale. So in this situation, if we just let the country be open and say, okay, now deal with it, we might have had to pay with a very heavy burden. The kind of number of cases that we are seeing today, you have to remember that India saw its first case on 30th of January. And so now it's been, good 6 months after that we are seeing this kind of caseload. We could have seen the same caseload in March or in April, had we decided not to lock down. So I think, these are all questions where, because we don't have a counterfactual, it's very difficult to say for sure that was this right, was this wrong. We can only go by, whatever we have in terms of experiences of other countries, and in terms of whatever, our leadership thought was best for our system at that point in time. Maybe if we were a very advanced health system, maybe if every state in India was very well geared up, maybe the leadership would have said, well, we don't need a nationwide lockdown. But that is not our reality. So given our reality, perhaps we had no choice but to do that. But I think how we are faring in terms of comparisons with different countries, as I said, these comparisons are difficult. They are onerous because we are really not a country. I would say we are more like a continent.
Right.
As I said, UP alone is a country. I mean, UP alone is a Brazil. So in that sense, of course, it's difficult to make these comparisons. But I think what is encouraging for us is that in terms of our, as I said, our case fatality rates, our death rates, they are still on the lower side compared to many countries. Of course, there are also countries which have done better than us. But as I said, dynamics are very different. Their population density might not be like ours. Their population size, of course, might not be like ours. So there's many different, elements at play. But I think the most important metric for us is the death rates, and the case fatality rates. And those are the ones that so far we have done a reasonably good job. But we need to keep working on that, and we need to keep pushing that number lower and lower, because, as I said, I keep coming back to where we started from, that, we have to save as many lives as possible. And that's the approach India has taken. India has not taken the approach that let things be, it's okay. What is it if a few lives are lost? That's not the approach we have taken. And I don't think that's the approach we should take also. So I think that's the number to keep an eye on. That number needs to stay in control. And I think then, that's why I said, Abhi, there's a lot of, India's number 2, India's number 3 in the world in terms of number of cases. And, so as I said, I'm not so worried about that, because if that means that we are also testing more, then I'm actually very happy as a public health person. Because that means that we are also being able to identify where the infection is. Because if you're not testing, you cannot identify where the infection is. You cannot control it. You cannot isolate it. So as a public health person, I'm happy to see that, testing numbers are going up. That's the most important thing for me. But yes, I would not want to see the number of fatalities going up. That, I think, will be the most important number that we have to keep a control on, and we have to keep bringing that down as much as possible.
That's actually very well answered, and I really appreciate the fact that most people come up with these questions that such so and so happened, and government is not taking cognizance of this thing. Government is not acknowledging the migrant crisis. Government knows this thing, and certainly they do acknowledge that, and it's probably a price that we had to pay to save more lives. So that's very well answered. And in this answer, you also mentioned that something about the Indian healthcare system. So my actually next question is precisely about the same. How do you see the healthcare infrastructure in India? I mean, what are the biggest challenges? And also, you mentioned in one of your very recent articles about what is required to build a strong and adaptive public health system in India. So would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah, so I think, there's huge disparities, as I said, in terms of our health system, there's a lot of disparities in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the human resource availability. And so I think that is one of our biggest issues is, how do we, bring these disparities, sort of minimize these disparities. I think that is really been one of our biggest challenges. And of course, it's not unusual given the size and the scale of the country that, we are bound to have these sort of differences. But I think from the central government's point of view, obviously, you want to minimize these and you want to have, every state on sort of at least some common basic level of healthcare. So I think over the last few years, the central government was working closely with the state governments, has launched a number of initiatives. Ayushman Bharat, all of you would know about. And there have been various reforms that have been undertaken on medical education, on Ayush, because we also cannot forget our traditional systems of medicine and what kind of role can they play. So I think that is another area. Then a lot has been done on medical devices, on pharmaceuticals, on trying to boost our domestic industry, and I think we'll see a lot more action on this front because I think people understand that you need to really boost your domestic manufacturing, whether it's respect to the APIs, the active pharmaceutical ingredients, or your medical devices. So I think there'll be a lot more that we'll see happening on this front as well. On human resources, as I said, we've had reforms on medical education, but there's also an attempt to expand the number of seats in undergraduate medical education and postgraduate medical education. So there's been, variety of reforms that have taken place and a variety of initiatives that have been launched. But I think the most important point to stress is public health. And I think, in our country, historically, we've unfortunately been more of a cure-focused health system. We've been more of a hospital-based health system, so we don't think of health in prevention terms a lot. We think, okay, if I get a disease, I will go to a doctor or I will go to a hospital and then I'll be fine. But we don't often think that, but I need to, keep my health good. I need to promote my well-being. So it's a mindset shift that we need to bring about. And I think that needs to, of course, come in the government, but it also needs to come from each one of us. Each one of us needs to not take our health for granted and think more about prevention rather than just cure. So I think the government investment in public health needs to go up significantly. I think there is a commitment, there is a stated commitment from the central government that at least 2.5% of the GDP should be spent on health, and I think a large percentage of this should go into public health, because public health is all about prevention. Public health is all about promoting health and well-being. It's not just about your hospitals and your insurance. And of course you need that. Of course you need hospitals. Of course you need insurance if you fall sick. But our objective, given that we are such a large population, we can't keep pushing everybody into a hospital. That's never going to be sustainable. I mean, look at the US. I always give the example of the US, which is a very private health insurance based system. And you can see, what is the condition in the US today. And it's a very expensive health system. US spends almost 17% of its GDP on health, and yet you can see that their outcomes are not very good. So, it's not just about spending more money, but it's also getting more bang for your buck. And you will definitely get more bang for your buck if you spend on public health rather than if you just spend on curative healthcare. So my hope is, after all of this, and I think the government is also committed. Remember, it's not just the central government, but the state governments also need to boost their spending on public health, because health is still very much a state subject primarily. So state governments have a big role to play in, how health policies take shape, how the funding in health takes shape. So I'm hoping that not just the central government, but also state governments will really boost their spending on public health, on primary health care. One of the pillars of Ayushman Bharat are the health and wellness centers. And the reason I always mention is because these are one of the lesser talked about initiatives. Everybody talks about the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, which is the health insurance. And as I said, it's very, very critical. But the health and wellness centers, that is a pillar that we really, really need to develop, because they are meant to provide primary health care. Again, they are meant to provide, early detection services. They are meant to provide health promotion services. Right. So I think, the whole focus and orientation of our health system needs to shift. And I think partly that had started to happen. I'm hoping that after this pandemic, it will get a further fillip. It's a very unfortunate reason, why something should get a fillip or should get accelerated. But I'm hoping that at least that will be one positive takeaway from this whole pandemic, that we will realize the importance of investing in public health, and we will do that in a significant way. So I think that is something I at least stress. I think if we do that, a lot of other things will start, taking care of themselves.
Right, precisely. That's very rightly mentioned that we focus more on cure, whereas a very less focus is on the prevention of the disease itself. So maybe we need a mindset change with respect to that. So I do have a lot of questions, but I think I'll start taking up questions from our audience as well. So Mr. Vinod Goyal is asking that the National Health Policy recommends establishment of public health cadre in the country on early basis. COVID-19 also has seen the requirement of the same. So what actions and plans are in pipeline for the same?
Yeah, that's a good question, and that's something that I would have also like to talk about. We have actually, even at Niti Aayog, we have been working on a model public health cadre, and we have taken inputs from different states, because some states already have had a public health cadre, or they've had some variant of a public health cadre. So we have tried to, work with these different states, get their inputs, and put together a sort of a model public health management cadre. And the good thing is that the states have actually resolved to set up a public health cadre if they don't already have one by 2021. So this is a resolution that a lot of the state health ministers have taken, and they have committed to that by 2021 they will actually have a public health cadre in their state if they don't already have one. So hopefully we should see some good progress on this front. And as I said, now that we've had this pandemic, and people will be even more appreciative, hopefully, of the need for public health, because for the longest time, because we have been a cure focused health system, we've thought of health professionals only as doctors, only as specialists. We have missed out that a huge cadre of health professionals are actually not doctors. They can of course be nurses, they can be allied health professionals, but you also need a lot of other disciplines which form a part of public health, like epidemiology, health economics, social sciences. So, you need all these skill sets. Only then can you say that, you have worked in public health. Because medicine is a part of public health, but it's not all of public health. And it might sound like a very fundamental point to make, but you'd be surprised that a lot of people still don't quite understand the distinction between medicine and public health. A lot of times people think, oh, you work in public health, you must be a doctor. I said, no, I'm not a medical doctor. I have a lot of other disciplines that I bring to the table, which you actually need in public health. So I think a public health cadre will be critical, and we need to ensure that not only is it rolled out just on paper, because for one thing is to say that I just tick the box and, I've rolled it out on paper. But in practice, the public health cadre should not be treated in any way lower to the medical cadre. Both should be at par, because both fulfill a very important purpose. Doctors are critical, specialists are critical, but you also need the public health people and the different disciplines I mentioned. So I think that's going to be our real task. I think in principle, at a high level, at a political leadership level, many states have agreed to put in place a public health cadre. But the implementation, as always, is really what's going to be key. And I think, I'm sure Niti Aayog, the health ministry at the center, will work very closely with states to make sure that the implementation is true to the spirit of what this cadre is supposed to do.
That's we all are actually eagerly looking forward to the upcoming plans, so that we can actually look forward to a better health coverage and better health policy in the future. My next question from one of the attendees, I unfortunately do not have his or her name, is what are your thoughts on the Delhi model? What have they done right, and can it be done nationwide? Actually, it's a very interesting question, because a few weeks back, Haryana model was in a lot of news regarding the efficiency of controlling and managing the outbreak. So would you like to comment on the Delhi model as well, and if at all, what Haryana did during that time, which was very efficient?
Yeah. Yeah, I think all of these different models, and in fact, what I have also been doing is actually putting together a compendium of good practices, because there are a few models we hear of in the news. The Delhi model, or Kerala. We hear a lot about Kerala. We hear so there's some which you hear in the news. But actually, every state has had some very, very good practices, whether it's Assam, whether it's Uttar Pradesh, I just spoke about. Various states have put in place some very good practices. And ultimately, a model is sort of, brings together some of these different practices as a package. So I think what Delhi did recently is they ramped up testing in a big way, and as I said, testing is one of the most important pillars, of containing a pandemic like this, an epidemic like this, because only testing can tell you where the infection is and where you need to play a role. Delhi also ramped up its infrastructure capacity in a big way. So many more isolation beds were created, because as you know about COVID, that a large number of patients are actually asymptomatic, or they have very mild symptoms. So they don't actually need hospital-based care, but they do need to be isolated from other people, because otherwise they can spread the infection to them. So you need a large number of what are called isolation beds And Delhi actually created a large number of isolation beds, including repurposing of, hotels, and they took up banquet halls in hotels and they repurposed them, and they created dedicated COVID care centers, some very, very large facilities. So I think it's been a combination of that. There has also been the home care model that has emerged, and actually the home care model cuts across different states, where people have realized that for people who are at home, you need to equip them with, pulse oximeters, because one of the things in COVID is that sometimes your oxygen levels can drop dangerously low. And you might not realize, till you start feeling uncomfortable, and by then it might be quite late. So one of the elements of the home care model is to equip people with pulse oximeters so that they can regularly keep a check on their oxygen levels. And if it drops, anywhere between 95, they can straight away contact a health professional, they can go to a hospital. So I think that's one key element. Being in touch with people who are at home, because just because you are in home isolation does not mean that the health system doesn't need to keep a track of you. They need to, because your symptoms might worsen. You might need hospital-based care at some point. So a lot of people have been using sort of tele helplines and other modes to, keep in touch with people who are at home and under home isolation. So I think, there are different elements of the model which worked, but ultimately it's testing. It's isolating the symptomatic people. It's ramping up your infrastructure, isolation beds as well as ICU beds. You really need ICU beds also for people who have moderate to severe symptoms. And home isolation, pulse oximeters. I think these are some of the key elements that make, a model. And when they come together, then it's like a package deal that, becomes very effective. So I think certainly Delhi has done a very good job in the last few weeks. But I think a lot of other states have also been doing very good work. I think Assam is one example that comes to mind. As I said, Andhra is doing very well on testing. Andhra also is a state where you will see the numbers have really been going up. They're also doing a lot of tests. So that's a positive. So I think from every state, we can take some positives, some good practices, and we are actually trying to put that together as a compendium so that it can be available to everybody, and people can implement different practices that suit their context.
Mm-hmm. No, that's actually very well answered. Uh, so moving slightly away from the healthcare domain, because one of the very burning questions that we had from a lot of people, they actually wanted to understand the Atmanirbhar package, which the government has very recently announced. Would you like to give us a very brief overview about what the package is about and what can we expect to, how it's going to benefit the people? Can you throw some light on that?
Yeah, so the package also, it's sort of been in stages. I think I look at it as in coming in stages rather than just one sort of package which came in one go. In the initial phases, it was very much focused on reducing hardships. As I said, for the most vulnerable, for the poor, for the migrant workers. So a lot of the initial initiatives, if you remember, announced by the finance minister, were focused more on addressing the most vulnerable populations, economically vulnerable populations during the lockdown period. So I think that was one part of it. But progressively, what we have seen coming after that is much more related to the broader economy and to boosting different sectors. And I think that is the direction that we are going to see going forward, that the government is going to come up with more specific measures for boosting different sectors of the economy, because as we know that the economy has not been uniformly impacted. There are certain sectors which have been much more impacted than others, like agriculture, for instance, has perhaps not been as impacted. If you would know that we also started the agriculture activities quite early, even after the sort of nationwide lockdown. Quite soon after that, we said, okay, agriculture activities can resume, because agriculture is one field which is sort of organically there is some physical distancing there, but we could not really say that straight away you can resume construction or factories, because it's very difficult to have physical distancing there, and it's still a challenge. So I think we'll need to look at sector-specific approaches, and I think that is the direction the government is going to take now. Travel, tourism, hospitality will need its own set of measures. That's been terribly hit across the world. Across the world, you see travel, tourism, hospitality taking a big hit. Aviation.
Right.
A lot of these sectors have been particularly badly hit. And then there are some others which might not have been as severely impacted. So I think we'll now see much more differential strategies coming in. A lot of the measures initially were sort of large scale measures trying to cover the most vulnerable, the informal labor, the migrant workers. So a lot of that, and that I think needs to be continued because their vulnerability continues. Their vulnerability has not gone away.
Right.
But I think now we will see a more differentiated strategy in terms of different sectors. The one thing I would say on the economy also is that it's not all challenges. There are also some opportunities. Like I would mention the whole digital, the whole digital adoption. We have seen very large scale adoption of digital technologies in the lockdown period and post the lockdown period. In healthcare, I can speak about telemedicine. Telemedicine adoption has gone up several times. And I think we need to also capitalize on these opportunities, So one thing is to obviously address the challenges, but the other is that wherever an opportunity has been created, how do we sustain that, because telemedicine can play a role not just during the COVID times, but even after COVID, because a lot of our population is in rural, remote areas where they don't have access to good quality healthcare. So in those areas, telemedicine can play a huge role. So the government is actually working on rolling out a national digital health mission as well. And initiatives like telemedicine, etc., can, sort of build on top of that. But I think, it's equally important to leverage these opportunities. And of course, in different sectors, we have different opportunities that would have been created. But we should also really focus on those. And I think Atmanirbhar, of course, as a high level concept is about, making in India. And I think now you can see that, with a lot of the health equipment that I spoke about, we've got a lot of domestic manufacturing happening. There are a lot of good vaccine candidates, which are in the pipeline, which are from Indian companies. So I think Atmanirbhar, of course, is a vision. It's a vision that we should be reliant, self-reliant as much as possible. I think it's sort of a bigger vision that the Prime Minister has given us. But I think we'll see it playing out in different ways in different sectors, and you'll see the differentiated strategies coming up for different sectors. So the government is actually working very closely with a lot of people from industry, with a lot of experts, to really get those specific measures on how do you revive demand, how do you revive consumption, how do you get things back up and running. So we are going to even be soon you will have a set of guidelines also in the public domain, hopefully, on how do you maintain physical distancing, hygiene while reopening factories, while reopening construction sites. So we have been working with MSME and labor ministry to also put together that, because that's going to be very crucial as well. As I said, we are continually trying to balance the health and the economy, where we have to ensure that we don't leave either of them behind as much as we can. So I think that's really what all of this is about.
No, that's actually very true. I mean, we are certainly running out of time now. Plus, I know you have some prior engagements as well. So can we take just one last question before we move on?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so I think this is a very relevant question because right now you'll see the media talking about the development of vaccines regarding the COVID-19. So very quickly, if a vaccine is developed, how prepared do we think are in terms of distribution of vaccine and immunizing the community? This is one of the audience members. I unfortunately do not have the name.
Yeah, in fact, I saw another question on herd immunity also. So I'll answer both.
Okay.
I'll answer both quickly. So herd immunity, I mean, it's because there's so much confusion around this. So I also want to answer this question. It's a very tricky concept to use in this kind of a context. Herd immunity, we usually talk about when you have a vaccination, for instance. And you say that, okay, if I immunize 60% of the population or 70% of the population, then the 60-70% will actually protect the 30% or 40% who are not immunized. So that is the concept in which we normally use herd immunity. Now, using it in the case of a disease and to say that, okay, I will let the disease spread, and then eventually people will have herd immunity is tricky. Because in letting that disease sort of spread in that fashion, you will also lose a lot of lives.
Right.
So there's some countries which have tried to say that we are going for this approach. Whether it was the UK initially or Sweden, or even Brazil actually for a long time, and even now Brazil has never really done a sort of proper lockdown ever. And I think a lot of them have sort of said it's because we want to bring in herd immunity. So it's a very tricky thing to have as a strategy. When you're talking about a disease, it's a very good concept to have when you are talking about a vaccination, or something which is basically a preventive intervention, a positive intervention. Then you can talk of herd immunity. But on the flip side, I think it's dangerous, because it could work for you. You could very quickly have population which has a high level of resistance, but you might also lose a lot of lives in the process. So it's not such a simple thing to have as a stated goal or as a stated strategy. So I think that is something just to bear in mind. The other on the vaccine, so since we're speaking about the vaccine also, so there are a lot of candidates. As I said, there's number of good promising candidates from Indian companies also in the pipeline. Different types of vaccines. We are seeing a lot of innovation on this front. In fact, a lot of the work the empowered groups has been doing is on the science side. How do we really give a fillip to the science efforts? How do we bring together different research groups in the country, and really try to accelerate the whole vaccine development? Because you have to remember that often vaccines take a lot of time to develop. Vaccines are not something that you just develop so quickly, because you have to go through the full procedure. You have to go through your clinical trials. You have to get the evidence, not just on the effectiveness of the vaccine, but also the safety. You can't roll out a vaccine in a population unless you've done the due trials. So normally it takes a lot of time, and it's also not a given. If you think about it, there are so many diseases for which we still don't have a vaccine. We don't have a vaccine for HIV. We don't have a vaccine for adult tuberculosis. We don't have a vaccine for dengue. These are a lot of these are all diseases which are very prevalent. So it's not always so simple. But what gives me hope in the case of COVID is that because the whole world is literally focusing on this right now, and the whole world is putting its resources and efforts into it, we should hopefully see some promising results. Of course, India is not just sort of focusing on new vaccine research, but we are also trying to build up our manufacturing capacity. Because if a lot of you would have heard of an Oxford group which is working on a vaccine which has shown some positive results. So should a vaccine become available in another part of the world, we want to be ready in India to very quickly manufacture it. So we are also boosting up our vaccine manufacturing capabilities. Of course, we are focusing on the research side, but we also want that should a vaccine become available, we should be very quickly able to produce and manufacture the doses at the kind of scale we need, because again the scale we will need is enormous. So we need to build up that capacity here. And in fact, India, this is also another great opportunity for India, because I think no matter where in the world the vaccine is developed, I think India will play a big role in its manufacturing. So I think it's a huge opportunity as well for India. So I think I'm hopeful that maybe by the end of this year or early next year, we at least see some good results on a potential candidate and a potential vaccine. But by the time it actually rolls out and it reaches all of us, it's going to take some time. It's very hard to pinpoint a specific timeline, because this is science. Science is going to take its own time. And we cannot fast track something without the right evidence, because then it can be more dangerous, and that's the last thing we want to do. So I think it's difficult to give a fixed timeline, but I'm certainly hopeful that by next year we'll at least have some promising candidate, hopefully, which we can then start rolling out. But I think till then, our health is really in our own hands. I think that's what I would like to say. And we have to continue to be very conscious about our hand hygiene, our face covers, our physical distancing. We should not be lax at all. We should not feel that, oh, it's okay, or we should not get tired and think, oh, I'm too tired of wearing this mask. Because, the virus is not tired of us. The pandemic is unfortunately not tired of us. So we can't adopt that approach either. We need to be very, very conscious. And I would just, say that even the younger people out there, please don't take it casually. We've unfortunately had, even younger people losing lives. So India, as you know, it's a much younger country. It's not a country where we have a large number of elderly people as a percentage of the population compared to, say, the European countries or, so in India, we have a lot of young people, but we shouldn't take it for granted. We shouldn't feel that, we'll be fine. We also need to follow all the precautions. So I think that's critical till we get this vaccine. There's a lot we can do to save our health, to protect the health of those around us. So I think we should really focus on doing that.
Thank you so much. And on that very critically important note and very critically important advice, I think it's time that we can bring the session to an end. Thank you so much for your wonderful thoughts, Ms. Prasad. It was fantastic having this interaction with you. And to all our audiences, thank you so much for joining us. And I really hope you found the session as informative as I found it for myself. If you missed any part of this session, this video would be very shortly available on YouTube, where you can catch up with anything you might have missed. And to everyone out there, stay safe and maintain social distancing, and we'll get through this very soon. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Mr. Saad. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.